Hello and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever time of day it is you're watching out there in the spirit plant medicine world, Conscious Living Network. My name is Marc Caron, and I am here with our special guest today, Rachael Carlevale. I probably said that wrong again already. I apologize, Rachael, but Rachael's going to be one of our speakers at the upcoming Spirit Plant Medicine Conference here in our 9th year, UBC in Vancouver. And Rachael is a permaculture farmer, yoga instructor, mindfulness educator, cannabis activist, and cultivator, and is working hard toward an eco-conscious revolution through her Colorado-based business, Ganjasana Cannabis Plant Medicine Yoga. Stephen corrected me on this one too. Ganjasana Cannabis School Yoga. I know it's a little bit of a tongue twister. It's her Ganja Yoga School, anyways, and her yoga teacher training bring Rachael a vast knowledge of plant medicine, yoga, and mindfulness to the world. She sees herself as a conduit for awakening messages from the natural world and a steward of the medicine. And she roots her practices in the ethics of permaculture, earth care, people care, and fair share. Stephen Gray is also joining us, the author of Cannabis and Spirituality, and our co-host and producer of the conference, and I know they're going to have a great conversation in regards to cannabis and what it can be used for. So, Rachael, welcome to our program, and maybe we can start by you introducing yourself and tell us kind of what got you into this line of work and what got your mission going to the world in this fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here, and I feel like you covered a lot in that brief introduction, but
there was a lot there, yeah.
And that was only about half of it.
And the thing about it too, all of those different modalities are really connected at the root of it, of looking at how we can heal in this connection to nature. Mindfulness, the practices of yoga, the practices of farming, they all are really tied to this sense of understanding our present moment awareness and how our intrinsic connection to nature can and find us into a life of balance, which will relieve our suffering and bring us great healing and really able to thrive in our life here on planet Earth. So all of those different things that you spoke of really are connected at the root. But what got me into it, I think, was just a pure curiosity and interest at a young age, working closely with plants and working in the garden as a small child, always having some body modality. I started out dancing with the Boston Ballet when I was 4 years old. So having a way to understand how to embody your body through something like dance, which I compare to the practice of yoga, was really intrinsic and setting me onto that disciplined path. Also, I took my first yoga class, surprisingly, under the influence of cannabis when I was 14 years old. So the plants found me first, and then the practice of yoga and that whole school of Ayurveda sort of came after the plants. The plants are what opened me up to this new understanding of life. I was sort of an all-star athlete, very dedicated to fitness, but didn't really have that mindfulness or spiritual component to it. At that time when I found my first yoga class, I was actually an ice hockey player. So I was at the gym and they offered free yoga classes for a gym membership. So I was like, oh, I'll try it out. And little did I know, instead of working out so much, it was really about working in and seeing how we can find that balance internally and really connecting to our spirit. And I think at such a young age, when you're a teenager and you're going through puberty, it's really important you have something that you can ground down into, whether it is some type of religion or speaking with the plants and understanding what spirituality is, because we are so separate, church and state. But then, where does that guidance come from for young children all the way up to, our adulthood, of how do we find guidance of how to connect with nature and know what spirit is and be able to deal with the mystery of life. So it sort of got into it at a young age, and then that helped unfold my career decisions of what I, studied in college and where I went from there.
So let's get right into the meat of it, as it were,
Mm.
or the vegetarian
Hey,
of
I
it.
was just going to say she's probably a vegetarian, Stephen. Be careful.
Yeah. Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm actually not, and that could be a
Yeah.
whole nother conversation. But in regards to permaculture and looking at the whole ecosystem, it's important to know that some bodies require different types of meals, and that's
Mhm.
part of the Earth Care, People Care, Fair Share. Those three ethics that we base everything off of. Alan Greensburg is a great TED Talk out there who speaks about to heal the world and to feed the planet. It's important that we do have some meat eaters in the ecosystem, an animal land graze
Interesting.
management,
Yeah.
animal husbandry to build the microbiology, life in the soil. And that's kind of also what I focus on, is how to build the life within the soil that then grows the plants, because any type of plant medicine that you're working with originally comes from the soil. And a lot of people might think about it in terms of like the wine industry. If you think about the grapes, they'll often talk about the body of the wine reflects the soil that it was grown in. And that's the same with plant medicine. Any plant you're using, we need to be mindful and respectful in the way in which it's grown, and that it's regenerative, where it's regenerating the earth. I know there's a large problem starting to happen, especially with ayahuasca being overharvested in the rainforests, and large concern with the fires happening in the rainforests. And so as these plants become more popular and people start to talk about them and learn about them and want to experience them, we need to do so in this ecologically conscious way where we can give back to the planet, regenerate not just the earth, but the people and the culture in which these planets come from.
Well, that's
That's
great that you
really,
have. Yeah.
yeah, beautifully said. And just one thing I wanted to throw in there real quick, Stephen, if I may, is, I
Yeah.
had a conversation with Dawn Danzingotter yesterday, and she was talking specifically about the challenges in the Amazon with the ayahuasca and the overharvesting and things of that nature. And I totally appreciate what you're saying about, making sure that the land and the earth and the soil is conducive to growing good medicine. So thank you very much for sharing that. That was a nice little segue to what's important in the world. Go ahead, Stephen. Sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah. No. Well, just to add on to that, I think it's wonderful that you're making that connection for people between our interrelationship with the planet altogether and the use of these kind of medicines. We have to get away from the sort of consumer philosophy, as it were. You go to the store and you buy something and you don't think anything further of it, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, what I was going to ask you a moment ago was in the terms of just getting right down to it, which led into this discussion of, eating animals and so on, is, on the spiritual use of cannabis, because you and I've talked about that, and I know you work directly with that aspect of it. So it's kind of an open-ended question, but let me put it this way. Let's assume that we're going to call cannabis a psychedelic. Certainly, from the point of view of mind manifesting or an entheogen, it can generate the divine within. And there's a quote that I don't have the exact words for, but I'm pretty sure I remember the gist of it from the legendary religious scholar Houston Smith, which was, "It's clear that psychedelics can produce a religious experience. It's much less clear that they can produce a religious life." And so the question I want to put to you is, yes, in the right conditions, set and setting, obviously, with the right kind of strain or cultivar and dosage and all that kind of thing, and perhaps guidance sometimes, cannabis can produce what you might call spiritual or religious experiences. But um, uh, is there a way to show, for example, scientists might do a study where they go, okay, let's take this person and follow them for 20 years. Have they had a religious life, so to speak, or did it open them up, from that point of view, to use cannabis as a spiritual ally? So how does cannabis fit into how have you observed that cannabis can benefit in the long term? Sure, people are having great experiences, but how does that, are they just going to go back to being the same person that they were, and then just have to rely on that for these dips into the divine, as it were?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, Stephen, when you said cannabis is a spiritual ally. And just like any substance or anything on this planet, there's always potential for abuse and misuse, just as there is potential for it to be spiritual and awakening for us. And ultimately, it always comes down to the individual, and anything we do, it requires work. And that's sort of what my talk is all about, is the integration piece of, there's a funny saying in my ayahuasca community that you can drink ayahuasca all day and still be a jerk.
Exactly. Yeah.
I had this conversation last night.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, you can have a brief moment of dipping into the spiritual awakening, but how do you hold on to that and actually turn it into your character of who you are and how you live your life and how you walk your path? And that is the key to the integration piece of why it's important to have practices. You might call them like a daily ritual about how to integrate this into your everyday life. So, for example, with the spirituality of cannabis, perhaps you take a mindfulness practice of a gratitude journal, where every time you work with the plant, you journal about what one thing you're grateful for. And that has been proven actually through Harvard Medical School, that it will improve your life and you'll make more money. And they looked at all different measurement factors, but that's just one small example of how we can integrate this into our daily life. But absolutely, it's not a cure-all that if you use a plant medicine, then you will all of a sudden become God or goddess, because I think that's sort of what's happening. I think Bob Marley said the herb will reveal yourself to yourself. And so a lot of people who work with cannabis might feel a sense of anxiety, and that may be because that's what you already are, and it's revealing that anxiety to yourself. So how can you sit with that and lean into the anxiety and see what's presenting it for you and learn from it, rather than say, oh, this plant doesn't make me feel good. And not that all plants are for all people, but I feel like that's a big thing I come up against from people, is they might feel that sense of anxiety, which is interesting because on a scientific level, cannabis contains sometimes high amounts of CBD, cannabidiol, and CBD prevents the release of cortisol, or stress hormone. So in thinking, if you use this plant on a scientific level, it's going to prevent me from being stressed out. However, it does stress some people out more because they're having to sit with their thoughts. That's one of the hardest things that we can do. And the plants are just our ally. They're a teacher, but ultimately we have all the answers inside. And I like to think of it as the plants are almost unveiling or lifting away layers or walls that we've built, so we can get back to our own core and say, oh yeah, I remember that I already knew this was my answer. And so I like to think of it as, you know, a friend is literally holding your hand on this journey, an ally, seeing a plant as a sentient being. You can talk to it. It may talk back to you. I always encourage people to really let their mind quiet enough to be able to listen to the messages. And so in the practice of yoga, if you're meditating or doing different mindfulness practices, breathing techniques or pranayama, you're setting your body, your cellular structure, into what's called the parasympathetic mode. And so when we take the time to set ourselves into the parasympathetic mode and take the time to quiet the mind, then work with cannabis, we're going to be more apt to be able to integrate it in a spiritual manner than if we just smoked or used some type of the herb in a way, whether it's an edible, without being mindful about our use and our intention of using it. So we can definitely use it for spirituality in an allyship way, when we can use it mindfully.
Excuse me. I think of cannabis as a reality medicine. You know, that ultimately, if you use it that way, and as you say, try to let go of the thoughts as much as you can, it's not about, in a sense, getting somewhere. It's like settling yourself down into what my old Buddhist teacher called ordinary magic, you know, where you're present, you're relaxed. You can potentially be relaxed and open-hearted in this moment and not have to fill your mind and your world with constant busyness and activity and that sort of thing, you know, just being present, you know. And so I want to ask you a question with a little comment about it, about the quote unquote spirit of cannabis. And I'm wondering, how would you define that? And for myself, I haven't had any experiences where I'd say it was like really obvious that there's a spirit there, but I feel like that she gives me ideas. She talks to me in a sense, not audibly, but just these things come to me. And one of them that made me think of it in this context right here is that one night I was sitting there and she said, or this thought came, enter in silence. Like when you first meet the plant, come in with a silent mind as much as possible and just totally be there for it or with it. Then you're going to really find out what it is and what it can do.
Absolutely. And I think in my understanding and the teachings that I've worked with, is that all plants have a spirit. And I remember one of the first plants I was working with was a lavender flower. And I had just concentrated so hard working with her, wanting her to talk with me and communicate in some type of way. It actually wilted a little bit. And so I feel like not just plants that are so obvious like cannabis or ayahuasca where it's like a almost psychedelic experience, but just seeing a new lens of all plants as being alive, like a sentient being. Even with different lineages of teaching, they'll see rocks, they'll call them the rock people. And so it's just a different mindset of looking at nature. And so when you see cannabis as just another plant in Mother Nature's wide apothecary, then it's approaching it with a new lens. And so I've definitely had experiences as well where maybe I'll get some type of download working with the plant, under the influence of cannabis or an idea or a thought. But there's also that divine line of, is that coming from me or did that come from the plant? And I have students ask that a lot of, was that my voice or was that the plant's voice? And that's the great divine question, the great mystery. And I feel like though it is very powerful, and even just with small amount, or I definitely had no education before working with the plant, before using it. And when we separate it between like recreational or medical, I feel like it's always medical for people, because if you're using cannabis to de-stress or to wind down and relax, you're still trying to alter your state of mind or alter your mood. And so that's a medicine that we're working with. And so in regards to letting the spirit speak to you, as I was mentioning, really working with different practices, like you said, still the mind and just listen. And so how do we do that? We have different practices of stilling the mind to be able to listen.
What kind of practices do you use for that?
So there's different anchored meditations that you can do in regards to focusing your meditation on, say, a specific color or a specific piece of nature. So you could do a meditation with a part of the plant. So before consuming plant, I'll, for example, sit with, and it depends on what you have available working with. Obviously, if you're not a cannabis farmer, you're not going to have plants always available to you, but you could just sit out in nature and sit with a tree and just do a gazing meditation, and especially notice things that you had never noticed before. I like to have students do gazing meditation down at the soil, because it's not always that we're scrutinizing and looking very close with life. And when you actually have your hands in the soil and you're just taking the time to focus on your breath and slow down and look at what's beneath your feet, we're able to see ourselves in it, to see everything as a reflection of ourselves. And also notice things that perhaps we've never noticed before and feel that sense of awe. And so when we can conjure a sense of awe in, maybe it's a grand scheme in nature, or maybe it's a piece of artwork that you or someone else has created, then we feel purpose, and then we feel a sense of our place on this earth. And so that's what gives us motivation to be good people and live spiritual lives, when we can conjure this awe, I might call it.
Yeah, beautifully said. In the Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist world that I spent time in for a couple of decades, they talked about, well, there are a number of different kinds of meditations, but there's a distinction between two particular kinds. And one is one-pointed meditation, which is basically what you've been describing, is you put your focus on something in particular. But they consider the, what would you call it, the root or universal meditation to be completely formless in that sense. So where you just give a light attention to your breath, and then just don't focus on anything in particular, but just be very present, and perhaps you might say with the plant itself in that way. Do you ever do that with your classes or students? Or
I do.
and actually, no, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I feel like that is very unapproachable for some people. It can feel overwhelming to just say, think about nothing, because that's the ultimate goal of meditation, is nothingness. When people say, I'm going to meditate on that, it's like, no, you don't want that going through your mind during meditation, an important decision. So in regards to having a student or somebody who's maybe never practiced yoga or never sat down to meditate, I find it's more accessible if you give them something to focus on. Like even with our breath, to take a deep breath, there's you could have a mantra, and that's why we have mantras, to give our mind something to focus on. And the goal of the mantra is to not need a mantra. It's a tool that we can use. They're very helpful to have. There's all different, hundreds and hundreds of mantras for different scenarios. But the more we practice and elevate in our practice and ascend, then we eventually don't need one. So for a typical person who's maybe new to these practices, I always like to give them an anchor to come back to. Like, for example, a simple mantra is Sat Nam. You inhale, you say Sat. You exhale, you say Nam. And that is giving a tool for your mind to focus on, so that chitta, that chatter, doesn't continue. That's what's really hard with working with the spirit of cannabis, is it increases that chitta, the chatter in the mind. It goes crazy. You start thinking all over the place, and maybe you're having tangents. And so having your intention at the very beginning of the practice anchors you back, because we're human, right? And the only thing we know is that we are imperfect. And so we know that we're going to have challenges when we sit down to meditate or when we attempt to do anything. And so it's nice to have tools in our tool belt to make this a more successful journey, right? So some people say we don't need any plant medicine at all. We should just be able to reach your enlightenment on your own. Well, that's great, but we also do have all these wonderful, beautiful plants in nature, and they're our ally, and we can work together and co-create these experiences. And so that's why I mentioned those specific meditations, to have a type of anchor to really ground down into.
So then my question becomes, excuse me, from meditation to your Ganjasana,
Ganjasana, you got it.
Ganjasana, your Ganjasana yoga. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that kind of practice, because I know it's happening here in Vancouver. They have, Ganja yoga and different things of that nature. How do you find that the cannabis adds value to, a yoga practice?
Well, to first look at the root of it in the ancient yogic texts, because there's many varying degrees of thought about this. And when we say bringing cannabis into yoga, I really see that yoga came from cannabis, that the plants they might call it amrita, that was dropped upon the earth. And in those places is where the ganja plants grew, like where we have the Ganges River in India, and Shiva is the lord of cannabis. And so they say that the plants, and if you, an evolution, the plants were on the planet before us humans. So the plants came first, then the humans came and were able to gain wisdom from the plants. And so they say cannabis was one of the plants that gave us the wisdom of yoga, of Ayurveda. So when you look at it that way, it's more about reviving this ancient practice of how does yoga work with the plants. If you look at Ayurveda, they work with all sorts of herbs. So why would they just take out one other than looking at our current political status of how we've demonized cannabis and other plants for political reasons? So it's really these ancient practices that we're reviving. And so, you know, there's a lot of controversy around that. I will say it's not using cannabis to elevate a yoga practice. The yoga, as we just talked about, having breathing techniques, having meditation techniques, those are practiced first before consuming cannabis. So it's really a way to ground us down and center us into that parasympathetic state of mind to be able to work with the cannabis plant spirit. And these are really things I learned through working with ayahuasca. I had already been practicing yoga for 10 years before I first sat for my ayahuasca ceremony. And I had a very difficult ceremony. And I think it was the second night, it was an 8-day ceremony. The second night, it came to me that I need to breathe. I wasn't breathing right. I was having a panic attack basically. And I was like, oh yeah, my pranayama, and my hands were clenched. And I remembered my mudras, the hand gestures, and it just all came how connected it all was about how you sit, how you hold yourself, how you breathe. It's almost like someone must have that training before they ever sit with a plant medicine as powerful as a psychedelic plant. Because when you're in it, when you're in the journey, you need to have these tools so you can have the most successful journey possible.
That's brilliant. Well, wonderful. That's great guidance. So, would you mind, if it's not giving away too many, trademarked secrets, talking a little bit about what would be the sort of typical structure of one of those Ganjasana ceremonies or practice sessions or whatever? Like, how long do they last? And talked about doing some practices first, and then you have the cannabis, and then what happens? That kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. So, in general, they've been anywhere from like a 3-hour ceremony to a whole weekend-long event. And I've done, short experiences anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour, but it was just kind of a glimpse into practicing these modalities. But the general glimpse of what a Ganjasana ceremony looks like is first coming in and grounding down. Perhaps that would be with sound. We use a lot of drumming and rattling, and that sets your brain waves into different tones and spaces. A lot of Native American cultures will use drumming. Different South American cultures will also use rattles or song to bring our body into this state. And then we'll do meditation and
just want to interrupt for a sec. Do you do the drumming and rattling, or do you have everybody doing it?
I do it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Carry on.
It depends. Every ceremony is a little different, and I always have a plan, but I like to really feel the pulse of the group, because the dynamics of the group change depending on who is there. And a couple times at the end of ceremony, I had a few live musicians, and they brought extra drums, and so everybody had a drum or a rattle, and we just all went into it all out for the end of the ceremony, and that was a really potent, special time. But not every single one is like that. But in regards to the drumming, I'll do that, and the rattling, and I'll generally bring in my worms. I do vermicomposting, and so that's another way to get the body grounded. There's research and science about putting your hands in the soil. It releases serotonin in your brain. and it increases your immune system in your body, and it just is another way to connect us with the plants. So we may do a meditation, having the worms crawl across your hands, and worms have what's called bioslime that binds soil particles together, and the bioslime, once it comes onto the parts of your hands, we have what's called marma points on our hands, and so the worms actually start to activate those marma points. And so a lot is happening all at once while we're just kind of sitting there quiet, feeling all the microbiology in the soil. And then maybe I'll give you a fan leaf from the plant, and we'll do a game and contemplate all of the Agni sun energy that it took to photosynthesize the plant to get here. We could eat it. Sometimes I'll make also a ganja chai tea. I'll do an anointment. And so for this ceremony, to open the space, we want every person to be cleansed and have a blessing to connect with the plant. So anointments you might see in other religions as well, of having a holy oil. And so I make a cannabis oil with the flower of the plants and put frankincense in that as well. And so that's placed on the forehead, on the palms of the hands, and the soles of the feet. And then we do what's called an asustas, is a brushing with the leaves. And so water is a conductor. And so we'll dip the plants in water, and then it's tapped on the head and the shoulders. We'll go through the chest and brush out the legs. And so this is to cleanse the person, but also to start to connect them with the spirit of the plant. It's being touched on their skin, our largest organ. And it's just a way to clear anything that maybe we've been holding on to for this ceremony. Also, we want to make sure we have a nice, safe container. I want people to feel really comfortable when working with the plant medicine. So something I forgot to mention, I'll have every person just maybe say their name or a word that's resonating with them, or something we want to hold space for them, so people feel really comfortable and safe to work with cannabis. And so we haven't even consumed the plant yet. So there's a lot of preparation that goes into that consumption. Then we'll do a blessing, and then all of the cannabis we use, I grow or I source from a trusted farmer that is regeneratively grown. And so that's, again, the most important part, is the medicine that we're using, that it is, beyond USDA certified organic methods. I'm not quite sure Canada's organic certification methods, but here in the
I'm
US,
not sure Canada's sure either, eh, Stephen?
Yeah,
Well,
we have
we do
list
have Health Canada organic certification for produce in general, but I don't think cannabis has been considered in that regard. There are lots of people that claim that they're growing cannabis organically, and there's a couple. They're starting to get some attention. They've got last I heard, about 75 clients in the United States now, called Dragonfly Earth Medicine.
I was going to mention.
Yeah, Josh and Kelly, and they claim that that their restrictions or standards are higher than USDA or whatever. Yeah.
They go above and beyond. I actually work with them, and they do what's called closed loop. They make sure you have, I think, at least 8 closed loops on your farm, and that means there's no waste, there's no water runoff. You're always reclaiming everything. And so that's another aspect of regenerative farming and using methods of permaculture on your farm. So all of the cannabis that we'll use in the ceremony is regeneratively grown. And depending on what type of ceremony it is, I may talk more about the farm, or we may actually be on the farm for the ceremony. So it kind of varies class to class. And we'll do a conscious consumption. I've done different methods, from smoking the plant to having a chalice, it would have like a coconut base and then a bamboo out. It looks kind of like a bong, a water piece. And doing the chai tea as well, making bang, the BHANG drink, with cinnamon and nutmeg, and coconut milk is really good. And so once we consume the plant, there'll be a few moments to let them sit and ground down into it. And then we'll go through a guided movement yoga practice. And so this is really yin based, and there'll be different guided meditation. And part of this yoga practice is always anchoring into the theme of listening to the messages of the plant.
How do you deal with dosage, especially when you're doing a, oral intake method like that?
So with the chai tea, I've generally done that with like a very low THC, high CBD, because of exactly what you said with dosing. And then in regards to participants, I always let them dose themselves. In general, a lot of plant teachers will choose the dose of the student. I know a lot of my teachers, that's how they work. But with cannabis, all our bodies are different. I always have people use a small amount, and then if after so many 20 minutes or so has passed, if they want more, I'll invite them to have more. But I always encourage people to start with really small amount, especially if you use cannabis before or for many years, to approach this experience with a blank slate, because maybe now that you're taking the time to be really mindful and conscious about your cannabis use, then it might feel completely different to you. So even if you are an everyday smoker, for example, having this new experience could affect you in a different way. So I always like to have people just if we're smoking, just have one hit and see how that feels for them, but they are allowed more if they want. I do tell people if they bring their own cannabis to not use it, and we just use what I provide. And the reason for that is that we can have that closed container, so that every person is on the same genetic cultivar, the same herb. And that is also for me as well. So I'm not having someone who's on, some super potent herb, or somebody who's on like taking dabs in a class. And like I've had somebody bring their dab rig to a ceremony, and I don't allow that in the ceremony, because I want it to be a held container.
So when you start with an oral, like the drink or whatever, the bong, that can take like an hour and a half or more to reach full effect. So what how do you deal with that? Like, I mean, you can give them a smoke a little later anyway, like 20 minutes, half an hour in, before they find out what the full effect of the dab is going to be? Or how do you deal with that dosage issue when it takes so long to reach full potency?
Yeah, so with the teas, any edibles will generally just have it be like CBD based tea, because also
very mild, yeah.
Very mild. Also
Right.
with edibles, they affect people at different times, and so it might hit you in 20 minutes, it might hit me in an hour, and so it's very hard to regulate that. I have experimented with our retreats where we allowed edibles after the ceremony. So because sometimes, like you said, you don't know how long it's going to take, but then also we don't know how it's going to affect us in regards to how much, if a 10 milligram is the standard dose of what we say here in Colorado, but it's also could be high for somebody, or it could be really low for someone. So I don't generally work with edibles for that reason.
Yeah, interesting. I always encourage people to try to take a 3 or 4 or more day cannabis fast before we have our ceremonies, so that the endocannabinoid system has a chance to reset itself. What were you going to say, Marc?
Well, that was part of the thing I wanted to say. It was the way you lead up to the ceremony in that fast. And, Stephen always kind of teases me, because when it comes down to sharing time, basically all I ever say is, I can't believe how so little can go so far when you go into a different setting, mindful use, and how, from being a kind of a regular cannabis user over the years, to take that fast and just 2 or 3 tokes really, and it is literally a psychedelic experience. So I certainly appreciate that. So, but I did want to switch gears a little bit. We're 40 minutes in, and I wanted to take a moment to talk about Cosmic Sister, because you're going to be presenting at the conference in November, and you've been awarded a grant through Cosmic Sister, and I see through your bio you've received a number of grants through Cosmic Sister. So maybe you can tell us what Cosmic Sister is all about. I know it's a group of ladies in the psychedelic field, and using your divine feminine, as I would say, superpowers to change the world through psychedelics.
Yeah, I am so honored to be a Cosmic Sister, and they are really all about uplifting women, wildlife, and wilderness. And Zoe Helena is the root of Cosmic Sister, and also a dear friend of mine. I consider her one of my great sisters. But I got involved with them through in college. I took a class with her husband, Chris Killam, the medicine hunter. I think he's going to be presenting at the conference as well.
Yes.
And he had a class called the Shaman's Pharmacy. And at the time I was a pre-med student, and I think it was Marc was at the college, UMass Amherst, and they were trying to get people into what they called food science, basically GMOs. And I was a young hippie activist, and I found.
Aren't you still a young hippie activist?
I was thinking like that was yesterday, right?
My activism techniques have definitely changed a lot, but I'm no longer chaining myself to walls and banging down the streets. But definitely activism has changed in the approach. But that class totally changed my life, the Shaman's Pharmacy. We went and spent a semester with the Shipibo tribe and the Peruvian Amazon. Wow. And so my whole college academic career had been studying medicine from the pharmaceutical industry point of view. Even state and private undergrads are completely funded by pharmaceutical companies. And so it was my first introduction to really understanding plant medicine and seeing how another culture approaches health through plant medicine. And so that's where I met Zoe, the founder of Cosmic Sister, and she had came with us for the trip, and we totally bonded and connected and wanted to continue these practices and see how we could support the women in the Amazon. There's a lot of unfortunate sex slave trade down there, and the deforestation of the Amazon. And when I went down there 10 years ago, I barely saw any animals. And so it hits home to experience all of these things, to have so much appreciation for the plants down there, but then to come back to the States and feel like, what can I do? And how can I give back? And I've been so positively impacted by this culture. How can I share it with others, but also continue to uplift the culture in which these plants come from? So Zoe had created Cosmic Sister to basically fundraise to allow all of these things to happen in the women of the psychedelic renaissance, women in cannabis, and she's connected so many amazing women. I got to meet a couple this past week. I was at Natural Products Expo East, and I got to meet some of the Cosmic Sisters that I had not met before, and they were doing some other amazing things in the natural products industry. And so once receiving a grant, then we're part of this amazing network of other women where we can continue to help each other grow and thrive.
Wonderful. I want to switch gears over to another question. That's a good question to ask, Marc. Give the Cosmic Sisters that are doing fantastic work a little plug there.
Well, I really want to just quickly. I just really want to honor the work that they do. I know Zoe Helene, is actively, promoting and sharing grants and bringing the women to the forefront, which I think is really important, because I think I happen to believe, women are going to change the world in an even more radical way, and to have, the right people at the forefront, teaching and influencing and sharing their knowledge and experience is just a very, very powerful thing. And Cosmic Sister has been a great supporter, as is, Chris Killam and Zoe Helene of the conference for a number of years, that I really want to honor and acknowledge the work that they do in terms of bringing this work to the forefront. So it's just really important to acknowledge that.
Absolutely. And by the way, I think all the women speaking at the conference, which are, I think, 6, counting Zoe, she's been this is their 4th year. Chris and Zoe, this is their 4th consecutive year coming to the conference. And each year in the past, Zoe has said something, I think I'm kind of getting ready to speak, but I'm not quite sure yet because I'm a naturally shy person. And then this year she said, I think I'm ready. So I thought, oh, okay.
Good.
So she'll be speaking as well. And she's funding all of you Cosmic Sisters to come. So extremely visionary, committed, generous work on that they're doing. And so I want to say a little bit about something a little more specific about that too, for people watching this. Not only is Rachael going to be giving a main stage or feature presentation of 45 or 50 minutes at the conference, but we're going to do for the 2nd year a cannabis ceremony in the evening. And we did it last year, as I say, and people were really blown away by it. And this year, Rachel's going to have an active role in that, doing some of these kind of guided meditations that have been discussed in this interview today. So I'm really looking forward to that, because I'm really impressed with the level of kind of detail that you've been talking about in the work that you do, and the careful, thorough preparation that you take people through. It's very interesting. So that I had this other question that's a little bit of a tangent, but I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on this one. How do you feel about, or do you have any feeling about mixing cannabis with other entheogens, either in a cannabis dominated sort of ceremony or as an adjunct to other medicines in where they're the feature, like psilocybin or ayahuasca or LSD or any of the others, even the empathogens like MDMA and such like? Do you have thoughts on that?
My short answer is it depends. And the longer answer would be, I know for, if you look at the chemical constituents, some things should never be combined. It could cause death. Like, for example, if you're on an MAOI inhibitor, or, mixing alcohol with different pharmaceuticals. And I'm not a fan of mixing alcohol with cannabis, for example. When people come to my ceremonies, I request they be sober, or, at least didn't smoke that day. I like your idea of having people fast. But on that line, plants also synergize, and some plants work really well together. And for example, for myself personally, I will not eat psilocybin unless I have cannabis present. Because for myself, I need cannabis to sort of ground me down and bring me back. But that's my personal
That was one of the lessons I learned from, the late, great Terence McKenna when I started entering this world, and I was doing my research, and I was listening to one of his things, and I had to listen to it a couple of times because I wasn't sure exactly what he was saying, but he says he always rolls a bunch of big bombers first. And I was like, bombers? What's he talking about? But he was talking
joints,
about making sure he had a bunch of joints, because exactly what you talked about, he said, if you find yourself really kind of getting out there, a few puffs and it'll ground you right back in. So,
but it also can also make it strong, potentiate the effects, though. And in fact, McKenna himself said that with psilocybin, like maybe an hour and a half in or something like that, he'll smoke a little, and he said that makes the hallucinations, how did he put it? It synergizes the hallucinations, was his language, I think, and prolongs the vision. Like, so it doesn't.
It can almost like set it off too.
Yeah. And in my Cannabis and Spirituality book, one of the contributors, Mariano da Silva, talks about in their ayahuasca ceremonies, when they're working with people they really know well. They don't do this with the sort of larger public Santo Daime ayahuasca ceremonies, but in an inner group of people that he knows can handle it. They sometimes after the second round of ayahuasca or daime, they will have a couple of puffs. And the way he described it was, he said the ayahuasca takes you to the top of the mountain, and the Santa Maria cannabis gives you wings to fly in the wind. So it really can potentiate the effects of things too. So how do you use it when you do that with psilocybin, at the beginning or partway through, or how does that work?
Well, I do the same thing where I make sure I have a whole jar of fat joints before I'll even eat. Because I've been at a point where I don't even know how to roll a joint right now, but I need weed, with using psilocybin. And so I just know myself and through my body, I like to be smoking weed a lot throughout the experience,
Wow.
beginning, middle, and end. And that's just myself, and not something, I'd recommend for all people, really, to feel what's good for you. But it's interesting what you say about ayahuasca too, because the first time I worked with that plant, the shamans kept singing to me about marijuana, marijuana. And they were almost trying to extract like a darkness of marijuana out of me. And because I was in college, I did a lot of substances that I should not have been doing and abusing them, including cannabis. And they could see that right away. And they actually thought I was there for detoxing. And this specific tribe believed that cannabis and ayahuasca should never be combined. They saw them as like two alpha females competing for space in the same room. So I find it really interesting you said that. But I've also asked the plant, I'm like, can't you two just get along and support each other and be two alpha females that get along? So I feel like they each have their place in the world, but I've personally never had cannabis and ayahuasca at the same time. So I'm curious about that. But I really just think it depends on the person too, because I have some friends that, for example, use cannabis, but when they're on psilocybin, they don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah,
And
interesting.
and a lot of psychedelics I won't use unless I do have cannabis, because for me, I know she really grounds me down and sort of brings me back to earth, so to speak.
Yeah, very interesting. Marc, are we getting near the end here?
We are getting near the end. I just thought that was a fascinating question, Stephen.
It was.
Just because there are so many different schools of thought depending on who you speak to. And I think what you're saying, Rachel, too, is really important, that, you got to listen to yourself and know yourself. And if somebody's not, cannabis friendly or experienced in that way, I certainly wouldn't suggest that they use it when they're using other medicines.
Right.
It's different when you have a different relationship with the plant. So that's just what kind of came to my mind in that. Though for me, I follow the guidance of whoever I might be sitting with, and what they recommend and what they want for their ceremonies. So
my view of combining cannabis and any of these psychedelics with each other and with other spiritual practices is, yes, they are advanced spiritual practices, and you really need to know what you're doing, be very careful and thorough about it. But at the same time, the world is in too much doo-doo for dogma. It's too late for dogma. We need to make use of all the tools we have available for us to us at this point, And cannabis and other medicines can synergize each other. Cannabis and other medicines can help with meditation, yoga, and other practices, etc. Yeah.
And this is what's great about this conference now in its 9th year is, the aim is to educate people and give people the information so that they can make their own decision and carry on in what interests them, to get some answers. And even if they don't get the answers, it just may open up the doors with more questions to seek more answers. It's one of the things I do love about this conference is the information that it brings to the people, as well as the way it brings the people together, because it's just such a great community builder as well that we've seen over the years. And it's just an honor to be part of that. So I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Go ahead, sorry. Yeah.
I was just saying I'm so excited. I love meeting other people who are interested in plant medicine. And so I'm really honored to be speaking this year.
Well, we look
really
forward
looking
to having you.
Yeah, absolutely. Marc, did you want to say anything else about the conference? Were you going to give, for example, a discount code to people watching
Well,
this?
for anybody watching this, we like to throw out a discount code. I always do it at the end because I want people to watch. It's FBL for Facebook Live 33. It's $33 savings off the ticket price. We've sold out of all our early birds and things, so we're just at regular price. So we're offering a discount there for anybody who's watching and gets something out of this video. There's a code for you there. Other than that, I think that's really about it, Stephen. It's, lots on the go. I was talking to Zoe Helene about an interview we're going to do with her, and Chris Killam coming up next week as well. So just lots on the go. We're getting into high gear with conference preparations and getting organized, and we're just looking forward to everybody coming together again for a few days of, learning and growing and, having a great time building community.
Right on. When you finish the live portion of this, we're still there, right? I want to say something to Rachael off camera, as it were.
Yes, as long as everybody doesn't drop off, we're all still here.
Yeah. Okay. So hang on for a sec, please, Rachael.
All right.
Yeah.
So, well, thanks everyone for watching. Please put your comments down below in this Facebook post, and if you have any questions, we can get to them as well, possibly. But thanks again very much, Rachael, for joining us and sharing your vision, your mission, and talking about your cosmic sisterhood. And Stephen, as always, it's never the same day without Stephen Gray.
Oh, you're too nice.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Tomorrow we have Dennis McKenna. We'll be talking to Dennis McKenna at 1 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, so join us for that. He's always an interesting character. So thanks again. Until next time.
Thank you.
Take care.
Cheers. Bye.